The five of us sat in the living room of our cozy apartment. This little scenario had played out several times before, as Lisa, my lovely bride of 3 years, and I hosted our parents. Unfortunately, this time it wasn't a pleasant Sunday dinner. My soon-to-be ex-wife sat on our couch, bookended by her parents, while my mother sat beside me on our love seat. I felt her squeeze my hand, reassuring me of her support. However, I knew she was struggling with her promise to me. I'd asked her not to speak during this confrontation and to allow me to handle it my way. Begrudgingly, she'd agreed after I'd warned her about what was coming. The only thing she'd said after everyone arrived was, in greeting them, however, she had plenty to say earlier. I remembered her words before my guests arrived. I wish your father was here," my mother had said. I just nodded. I didn't have the heart to tell her I was glad he wasn't. No son wants his father to preside over his dying marriage. Added to that, I knew that he and Margaret, my mother-in-law, despised each other, and this meeting would have escalated into World War III. There wouldn't have been any chance my plan for handling this would have worked. I could almost hear his voice. "Son, do what you gotta do. Your mom and I will stand by you," he would have said. And he would have given me that "I told you so" look and smiled. All right, I lied. I missed him not being here. But I needed things to go as smooth as possible if I was going to get through this without losing it. If he was here, that wouldn't have been possible. Of course, for this to go the way I hoped, I'd have to remain cold and emotionless. A week of stewing on the events of the past 7 days had taken me through the emotional ringer. I hoped I was numb enough to pull this off. It was my father-in-law who broke the awkward silence. "Danny, thank you for meeting with us," Phil said. I looked at him and noticed he seemed tired. All three of them did. Apparently, there'd been a few sleepless nights in the Thomas household. I actually felt sorry for him. I liked my father-in-law. He was basically a pretty good guy, even though at times he could seem spineless when it came to his wife and daughter. On the far side of the couch sat my mother-in-law, the evil dragon of the north, perched, ready to swoop down and attack. Margaret, don't call me Marge, could barely contain her contempt for me. To say that I was her least favorite person for stealing one of her babies would be a gross understatement. The fact that I'd supposedly corrupted her innocent daughter before the wedding just added to her reasons that I should be publicly drawn and quartered. Of course, the fact that Lisa wasn't innocent when I met her. Well, let's not let the facts get in the way of a good reason for a witch hunt. I knew this meeting would be extremely difficult on her, and that thought kept a small smirk on my face. She'd be forced to swallow her venom if they had any hope this marriage could be saved. It couldn't be, but they weren't convinced of that yet. In between her parents sat Lisa, dressed in jeans and a blouse. I thought she looked beautiful. She wasn't model material, but more girl next door pretty. Even with her eyes, bright red from crying, I could still see the girl I'd fallen in love with 5 years ago. When I looked at her, I found it suddenly hard to breathe, and my heart pounded against my ribs like they were an anvil. I may have appeared cold and calm on the outside, but inside the pain was still raw. It appeared she wasn't doing any better. Of course, I didn't have much sympathy for her, since it was her actions that brought this on us. It was my reaction, however, that disrupted her little sister's wedding reception last Saturday. No doubt the guests would remember Stephanie and Mike's wedding for a long time. Since then, Lisa had been staying with her parents. This was the first time we'd met face-to-face since the wedding. The few times I'd talked to her over the phone were pretty much a disaster, so I stopped taking her calls. I'd asked her why, and her responses were basically pathetic excuses. I realized I may not have ever really known my wife. "I know this has been a very difficult time for the both of you," my father-in-law continued. "But hopefully we can talk a few things out and begin trying to heal your marriage." "Thank you, Mr. Thomas. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but there's really no reason to try resuscitating something that's dead," I replied. Thankfully, we hadn't had kids yet. The only thing left to do now is to figure out how to bury it and begin the divorce. "Danny," Lisa whispered, with tears running down her face. "I don't want a divorce." I studied her and clenched my jaw in an attempt to say calm. "And I didn't want to catch my wife with her ex-boyfriend at her sister's wedding reception?" I shot back. I guess I didn't hide my anger well. "We don't need that kind of language, Daniel." the dragon stated in a condescending voice, making my skin crawl. "This isn't your home, Marge," I growled back at her. "And you're welcome to leave any time you want." I could see her actually gag as she choked down her response. She shocked me, though, and didn't say anything. Hell must have frozen over. He answered goggily. "Danny, I'm so sorry," Lisa whimpered. "It was a mistake." "A mistake?" I said, trying not to sneer. Given the response of those on my couch, I apparently failed. "Tell me, Lisa, what exactly was the mistake?" I continued. "Was it getting so drunk at the reception you thought it was okay to show everyone how inappropriately you could dance with your supposed ex-boyfriend? Or was it when I pulled the two of you apart and you told me and everyone watching you don't own me and you'd dance with whomever you choose? Maybe it was my mistake for taking my eyes off of you. An hour later, I turned around and you'd disappeared. Then, when I finally found you, you're just there with that guy. I sure as hell know it wasn't a mistake when I hit him and kept hitting him until you started screaming that I was hurting him. I might have been wrong to stop, though, because when I turned to face you, the little coward ran. So tell me, Lisa, just where exactly was the mistake? Were you dancing so close that you accidentally ended up in a compromising position with him? Danny, it was just, she sobbed. I was drunk. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. Don't know what happened? It's pretty simple. I'm sure Marge told you about relationships. That's when people are supposed to be faithful to each other, I responded harshly. Of course, after you're married. There's not supposed to be anyone else. Please, Danny, I'm sorry. It'll never happen again, Lisa pleaded. Danny, her father interceded. I know this seems really, really bad. I started to respond, but he put up his hand and continued. All right, I know it is that bad, Phil continued. But it was a one-time thing. Son, I know you two can get through this. You're strong enough to be able to forgive her for this. Well, Mr. Thomas, I don't know if I could get past a one-time thing or not. But this isn't a one-time thing, is it, Lisa? I asked, watching her face turn even paler as I turned back to my father-in-law. It seems your daughter was such a thoughtful big sister at Stephanie's bachelorette party that she took it upon herself to show her little sister some inappropriate behavior. Apparently Stephanie was a quick learner, I revealed. I received a disturbing video earlier this week. Surprising how good cell phone videos are nowadays. It might not be professional quality, but it was good enough to make out the Thomas sisters engaging in inappropriate behavior with male entertainers. Lisa buried her face in her hands. Oh my goodness, she moaned. I wonder if Mike knows, I continued coldly. Not the part about inappropriate behavior after a week-long honeymoon cruise. I'm sure he already knows about that. I'm talking about the entertainer part of the story. Somebody should tell him, don't you think? I mean, he'll believe that string of nonsense about it being a one-time mistake, won't he? Phil and Marge were now as pale as their daughter. Lisa's sobs punctuated the eerily silent room. I'll admit what happened next surprised me. I figured that little revelation concerning the entertainers would put an end of this meeting. I was wrong. First, I was surprised she'd been able to stay quiet as long as she did. Next, I thought she'd try to do damage control and try to guilt me into staying in the marriage. Well, at least until I messed up and then Lisa could publicly divorce me. That was my mistake, I thought. Seems the dragon believed the best defense was a good offense, so she attacked. You sanctimonious fool, Margaret growled at me. You sit there acting so smug and innocent. Margaret, please, Phil pleaded with his wife. No, Margaret shot back. I'm not going to let this person threaten to blackmail this family, especially when I've got proof he's as guilty as Lisa. To say there was a stunned silence by everyone in the room would have been an understatement. Then she began digging in that backpack she calls a purse. Moments later, like a magician pulling a rabbit out of his hat, she produced a small manila envelope. To be honest, I was a little disappointed that she didn't yell, "Ta-da! Here, deal with this," she snarled, throwing the envelope at me. Inside, you'll find pictures of your car outside the roadside motel last month when you were supposed to be in Chicago on a business trip. There are also copies of the motel registration, Margaret continued. My mother gasped and squeezed my hand. Using the name John Smith wasn't very original, Marge smirked as she continued. but the attendant logged your license plate number." Lisa kept her face buried in her hands and sobbed. Marge wrapped her arms around her, trying to console her. "It's okay, honey," Margaret cooed softly to Lisa. "Mama took care of it. I told all the women at the church 2 weeks ago. I'm sure most people around town know about it by now. When they hear what happened at the reception, they'll know it was because he cheated first. What's good for the goose is good for the gander." I was shocked at how calm I was on the outside. Inside, my heart was trying to break through my chest while my brain screamed at me to confront the dragon. Maybe I was in shock. I looked through the contents of the package and then gave it to my mother. I noticed she had tears forming in her eyes. I gently patted her hand and smiled. "Well, Marge," I stated calmly as I turned my attention back to the beast, "before you plan on your own little detective episode, you might want to brush up on your detective skills. The Chicago business trip was actually a training seminar my company sent me to in order to get certified. I have about 30 other attendees that can vouch that I was at every boring session for all 4 days. While I was out of town, we put Lisa's car in the shop for some maintenance repairs. Want to guess whose vehicle she drove while it was in the shop? Another little piece of information that you'll find interesting. Do you remember the names of the people who work with Lisa down at the Southside Medical Clinic? Come on, Marge. Surely you remember Dr. Sammy. Well, his full name is Dr. Samuel Jonathan Smith. Doubt, my father-in-law sputtered. He's older than I am. Yeah, seems your little girl has daddy issues to go along with some questionable tendencies. Good luck with counseling, I replied to Phil. Danny? Lisa whispered. Yeah, I know, I snapped at her. It was only a one-time thing. I stood and looked at the trio sitting on my couch. I didn't think I could hold it together much longer, so I needed this to be over quickly. I think we've pretty much said everything that needed to be said. It's time for you all to leave, I announced. Bill stood and helped Lisa to her feet. Marge remained sitting, frozen. I thought at first maybe she was having a seizure or maybe even a stroke, but no such luck. She gathered herself and stood. Staring at me straight in the eyes, she gave me a parting shot. I expected better from you, Daniel, Margaret said coldly. And I expected nothing less from you, Marge. You acted just like the self-righteous, hypocritical person that you are. Now get out of my apartment, I replied firmly. She left angry, but at least she left. Phil surprised me by giving me a big hug before he chased after her. That only left Lisa. When she looked up at me with her beautiful green eyes, puffy from crying and so full of pain, I couldn't stop my own eyes from watering. Danny, I can't tell you how ashamed I am, she said softly. I'm so sorry. Not half as sorry as I am, Lisa. I'm sorry I wasted my love on someone like you, I replied. She sobbed and ran out the door. As I closed the door behind her, my emotions overwhelmed me. I rested my head on the door and fought a losing battle, trying to hold back the tears. The simple fact was I loved the lying, cheating woman and she'd hurt me like I'd never been hurt before. I still didn't know why she'd cheated, but then even knowing the reason wouldn't have changed the fact my marriage was dead. I knew my pain, anger, and depression weren't going to go away anytime soon. My mother came over and hugged me. You okay? She said softly. No, I whispered, and I won't be for a while, but I'll get there. You know, your dad would have been proud of how you handled that. Do you know what you're going to do now? My mother asked. I nodded. Yeah, there's really not much to split up, so I think I'll take Marge's advice and go for maximum embarrassment. I'll have Lisa served as they're leaving their church on Sunday. I'll also see if I can sue the good doctor and his clinic. Even if I can't win, I'll make sure he's served at work. That should cause a scene, I explained. What about Mike and Stephanie? My mother asked. Mom, if someone sent that video to me, there's a good chance they sent it to Mike as well. Even if they didn't, he needs to know. Maybe they can work through it. I hope they can. If they do, maybe it'll stop any future cheating, and their marriage will last longer than the 3 years mine did. I'll email Stephanie and tell her she's got a week to tell him herself before I do, I answered. She looked at me and smirked. You're just like your dad, she said, shaking her head. Too bad he couldn't have at least heard our meeting, I replied. She smiled innocently and reached for her purse. Opening it, she pulled out a micro recorder. He asked me to record it so he could hear it when I got home. You know it almost killed him not being here today. He was disappointed when you asked him not to come. He understood, but I still think it hurt his feelings, my mother revealed. Well, it looks like I'll have plenty of time to make it up to him since most of my future plans are now in the toilet, I said. I slowly shook my head and sighed. I feel like I've wasted 5 years of my life. No, she said softly, not wasted. You just learned some very painful lessons. Hopefully, you'll use it to make your next marriage even stronger. Next marriage? I snorted. I'm not sure I'll ever trust another woman enough to marry her. She stepped back and smiled at me. Honey, you're 27. It will take a long time, but you'll find some lucky girl who will be special enough for you to try again, my mother said encouragingly. My mom, I chuckled. The eternal optimist. She reached up and kissed my cheek. I have to be. I'm still expecting some grandbabies out of you, she said with a laugh. We both laughed. The sound of our laughter reassured me. I'd be happy again. Someday. 5 years later. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows of my new office as I leaned back in my leather chair, reviewing the quarterly reports. Thomas & Associates Medical Consulting had exceeded projections again. It was hard to believe how much had changed in 5 years. My secretary's voice crackled through the intercom. Mr. Daniel, your wife called. She wanted to remind you about dinner with your parents tonight. Also, that reporter from Business Weekly is here for your interview, Janet announced. Thanks, Janet. Send him in, I replied. I straightened my tie and smiled. Life had a funny way of working out. After the divorce was finalized, I'd thrown myself into work with a vengeance. The lawsuit against Dr. Smith and his clinic had been settled out of court for a substantial sum, enough to start my own consulting firm. Turns out, medical malpractice wasn't the only thing the good doctor was guilty of. The state medical board had taken a very dim view of his extracurricular activities with employees. The reporter, a young guy who looked fresh out of college, walked in with his notebook ready. Mr. Daniels, thanks for agreeing to this interview. Our readers are fascinated by your success story. From a failed marriage to building one of the most successful medical consulting firms in the state in just 5 years, the reporter said. I chuckled. Well, sometimes the best motivation comes from the worst circumstances. I understand your ex-wife tried to contest the divorce settlement, the reporter asked. She did. Unfortunately for her, adultery tends to complicate things legally, especially when there's documentation, I replied, keeping my tone professional, though I couldn't help but smirk. Last I heard, she was working at a clinic in another state. Dr. Smith lost his license, so I suppose she had to find new employment opportunities. The reporter scribbled notes. And the family situation? Well, my former sister-in-law, Stephanie, divorced her husband, Mike, about 6 months after their wedding. Apparently that video I mentioned to her found its way to him after all. She's remarried now to a nice accountant. We actually get along well these days, I explained. What about your former mother-in-law? The reporter asked. I laughed out loud. Margaret, excuse me, don't call her Marge, had to eat quite a bit of crow when the truth came out. Turns out spreading lies about someone's character in a small town can backfire spectacularly when you're proven wrong. She and Phil moved to Florida. I send them a Christmas card every year. The reporter looked puzzled. That seems generous. Phil was always decent to me. As for Margaret, well, success is the best revenge. My Christmas cards always include our family photo and a little note about how well business is going, I replied. After another 20 minutes of questions about business strategies and market expansion, the reporter packed up his things. Last question, Mr. Daniel. Any regrets about how things turned out? The reporter asked. I thought for a moment, then pulled out my phone and showed him my wife wallpaper. A photo of my wife, Sarah, and our 2-year-old daughter, Emma, at the beach last summer. Not a single one, I said. I met Sarah at a business conference 2 years ago. She's an attorney specializing in medical law. Smart, beautiful, and most importantly, she has integrity. We just found out we're expecting our second child. The reporter smiled. Congratulations. So your mother got those grandchildren she wanted after all. She did indeed. And she never lets me forget that she predicted I'd find someone special enough to try again, I replied. After the reporter left, I gathered my things and headed out. Mom was making her famous pot roast tonight, and Dad would want to hear every detail about the Business Weekly interview. They'd been my rock through the darkest period of my life, and now they got to share in the joy of watching their son build something meaningful. As I drove home, I thought about that awful day 5 years ago when my world had crumbled. The pain had been excruciating, but it had also been clarifying. It taught me what real love looked like, what genuine partnership meant, and what I truly valued in a person. I pulled into the driveway of our house, Sarah's and mine, and saw her through the kitchen window, probably helping Emma with some art project. Emma had Sarah's blonde hair, but my stubborn streak, and she was already showing signs of being too smart for her own good. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw the article online. Congratulations on your success. LL. I stared at the message for a moment, then deleted it without responding. Some chapters of your life deserved to stay closed. I walked up to the front door and heard Emma's squeals of delight from inside. Sarah's laughter followed, rich and genuine. This was what winning looked like. Not revenge or proving a point, but building something real with someone who deserved it. Along the sound of my family's happiness was better than any vindication I could have imagined. I opened the door and stepped into my real life, leaving the past where it belonged, behind me. And so, we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a twist you didn't see coming? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and let's get a conversation going. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here or just haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day, so click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.